Review. Scripted versus unscripted. Is our life scripted or unscripted? Spontaneous versus scripted. Before I forget, there is another YouTube channel. It's not bad. I forget her name. Melissa, maybe? It's called the Goldfish Report. It just popped up on my timeline. Qualifiers and givens, that sort of review. See, sometimes when I come on here and I'm only on for 12 minutes, 15 minutes, it's impossible to cover all the data, right? Okay, so I put the data there, but there's other data that's linked to it that I just didn't present that part of the data. So this is where you get into qualifiers and givens, and when you're in a classroom and you have a teacher and a student, or what I call an information giver and an information receiver. Okay, so what is the information that you're giving me? Well, it's only part of the story because we're storytellers, and the stories that we tell go on forever. So to give you all the data at once is going to be impossible, isn't it? Because there are infinite possibilities. Okay, right? Okay, so when you're sort of on that level, you begin to realize that, hey, you didn't cover this because you're aware of that. Well, okay, good, you're aware of that. I wasn't aware of that, but how much time do I have to provide all the data? We got to sit down together and realize we're going to do this forever. And we can do that forever when you're not in the body, when you're just consciousness. That's why if you've ever had an out-of-body or an after-body experience, then you realize that you're still aware of who you are, and you're looking at your body going, hey, I'm not the body. I'm still aware of what it is that I am. So the body is the density, the mass density, the weight of the body, but I'm not in the body anymore. I'm massless. You want to teach a child real quick? I mean, like lightning fast? Go find yourself a 12-volt battery. You know, the one that's in your car. You know, what I call noise machines. And don't use distilled water. Put spring water in that thing. Okay? You know, the ones with the old caps? Right. There's a reason why they came out with different batteries that don't have the ability to teach you, if you will, with the difference between the poles, with the negative and the positive ions, right? Okay, they repel each other, right? That's the bang. Starts your car. So when you think of, for example, a negative pole and you're grounded, got to be grounded, right? Otherwise you don't get the charge, the bang. So if you ever notice in the olden days, when I call olden days, it's just a flash in the rearview mirror, but what it really is that we used to buy these, I call them steel squeegees, because all of a sudden, you know, your car's not starting very well because you've got a lot of buildup over on the right pole. So you begin to realize, hey, I got to get that stuff off of there. And it's green. You notice it's green, like algae, green. So what are you doing? That's living stuff. Okay, because you got spring water in the battery. Living water is in the battery. So the living water is using the charge to produce living stuff on the pole. Bring that into your classroom someday. Okay? Teachers don't do this kind of stuff. And then I thought about, okay, so you get 25 people and a student, because this is how I do it if I'm going to be a teacher, although it's not like an authoritarian, I always think of myself as simply what love is in living spirit, and I'm simply imparting everything that I've experienced that we can all learn from, and then you share everything that you've learned from through all your experiences. See? So that's why we do a circle of light, holding hands, living through our heart with all those experiences, because everybody's running a powerful vortex in which all that information, which is all that data, which is all those experiences that we're all experiencing simultaneously, past, present, future. So we can move between past, present, and future by having access to all the information in the field. And now we get to choose where you want to go together. You want to go push that hurricane off the big island? I tried to suggest that to a lot of people, and it didn't gel. So I thought, okay, that's cool. And there I was in Hilo, Hawaii at 12 o'clock midnight when that thing was supposed to hit. I was right downtown with 6 feet of water. I couldn't even get on a bus. I eventually got on a bus. But you could experience the consciousness, the darkness, if you will, of the consciousness that was directing that hurricane. I could experience essentially the energy signature, okay, that was driving the hurricane. Okay? So it was like looking up in the sky and realizing this thing's dark. And it was dark out. But what I'm not talking about is the color per se, as much as the energy that was driving it. So I thought to myself, man, I'm trapped in all this darkness. So I got to be the lighthouse. I got to be the lighthouse. Right? So, as it turned out in a later clip that I looked at, there was a bolt or a beam that came and hit that thing. I guess it was a couple hours later, and it dissipated. Just shattered it, basically. In other words, it dissipated the energy that was driving it. And so anyway, when I thought about a classroom this morning, because this is just spontaneous. This is not scripted, what I'm saying here. This is just whatever comes because of everything that we're aware of that is accelerating at such a high rate of speed. So I simply impart what it is that I'm aware of at the time in which I'm aware of it, because it just keeps moving. So there were a few things that I wanted to cover that I thought were important, because it's not a coincidence why things get presented to me and why they get presented to me by certain beings that I chose to hook up with because of what they're aware of that I become aware of. And this sort of gives me a way in which to calculate the speed and the events that are being experienced by other beings. Now I'm experiencing it through that being, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so in other words, we're all transmitters of data, information, knowledge, what we're experiencing at any one given moment of time. We share it with everybody else. And that's sort of how I used to sort of measure the speed at which people become aware of what they become aware of, and then you can see how they share what it is that they're aware of that you were aware of before they were. So you can begin to sort of see the speed at which information or data is running through the circuits that, represent obviously your plasma. Okay. And of course your state of consciousness. What are you aware of? Higher energy, lower energy, higher energy, lower energy. So it's like you're measuring the accelerator. Which is the difference, the various speeds at which people are experiencing who they are at any one given moment of time. Right? You go over to wherever there's living magma, and you're going to be experiencing energy that's off the charts. Man, you think you're plugged into the biggest electrical power station there is in the cosmos. And then all of a sudden you jump on an airplane and you get off the airplane, and now you've been exposed to a lot of high radiation, and now you got to kick out all that junk, because I experienced that. So the experience informs you of the energy that you're experiencing. Remember the toxic input, now the toxic output. So that's data in, metadata out, represented by what you experience. Okay? So in this particular regard, there were... I wanted to say this because this is how I sort of perceive what it means to be a student and what it means to be a teacher, per se. So, for example, you walk into a classroom, say in 4th grade, just as an example. So now you got 25 students, which is 25 states of consciousness. So we know that every single student that's in that class, boys and girls, all represent different experiences. The sum of their experiences that they're aware of at any one given moment. So you realize that a child that's, 8 years old, somewhere right around there, has all of its experiences that it's holding in memory. So you got 25 different students that are in that classroom, boys and girls, that represent all their stories. That's a lot of stories. Imagine how many stories that those children all have to tell each other. So then imagine that all the students are in the classroom and sharing stories with each other about all the things they've experienced together. Next thing you know, those teachers standing off in the corner going, what's going on here? Wait a second, I'm the teacher in this. So all the students look over at the teacher and says, hey, come on over here. Let's tell us your stories. You're older than us. I'll bet you have a lot more stories to tell than we do. Next thing you know, this teacher's starting to share her stories. Now everybody's learning from each other. Wow! That's your library. Now you're experiencing a bigger library of more data, more information that we're all learning from. Somebody's not trying to shove down your throat what it is you're supposed to put into your memory. You want to learn fast? Learn through everyone. Everyone that exists in the cosmos. How fast are you running? How fast do you want to learn? Which is how fast you're experiencing everything that is possible to experience through learning through others and everybody else that exists within the cosmos. So we're all students and teachers, ain't we? Sharing each other's experiences. Isn't that a beautiful thing? So imagine, remember when I talked about libraries? How big is your library? Man, I can't spit my library out in a matter of a few seconds. So I was thinking last night because it was prompted. It was like my future self telling me, don't forget about the qualifier. You didn't qualify something that you said yesterday. Oh, forgive me. Okay. Remember I talked about Hollywood and the movies and the stories that we tell? Okay. So I put my projector down because I'm not creating, manifesting anything. I'm now wanting to experience through my state of consciousness what's in your state of consciousness of what you're aware of. So you tell me that this is a story that you wrote. So now I get to experience with my consciousness, your consciousness, and the story you're telling me. That's sort of like Hollywood. So you're experiencing the scriptwriter that wrote the movie, basically wrote the story, and then, of course, the director and the production company decide that, hey, this is going to sell a lot of money, a lot of popcorn, a lot of seats, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, they harvest energy out of those auditoriums when all those movies are being played. I didn't realize that until after I thought about it, and Patty mentioned that to us, and I thought, yeah, of course. So if they want to run a horror movie like Frankenstein, imagine all the energy they get to collect out of that, because anything below 250 megahertz, we're food. We're food and lower frequency energy that they harvest. That's why they wanted everybody in a state of fear. I've never known a real American to ever be in a state of fear. I'm sorry. Americans, to me, a real American is fearless. Okay? Because I've experienced too many real Americans ever since I was a little child that ran with love in their heart and peace and harmony with others. I was very fortunate enough that I grew up in neighborhoods in which mothers and fathers treated their children with love, kindness, and empathy, okay? And that kind of energy meant that when I came home from school, for example, in second or fourth grade, I was experiencing higher energy in my neighborhood. I could leave my bicycle out in the front yard and not ever have to worry about some other kid grabbing it. I experienced that yesterday, where two girls, probably around 12, 13, were standing there in the park with two bicycles, so I just immediately assumed these are two young girls, teenage girls, right, with their bikes, just enjoying themselves. I walked by and said, hey, how you doing? And they looked at me. So I went over and sat on the bus seat, and all of a sudden, here comes a taxi cab around the corner, parked right in front of me. Here comes a lady who I guess she was Latin or whatever, and she walked over to the two girls. So I could see that that was not a nice conversation. So the next thing I know is what I realized is that the two girls that were with those bicycles are now in the cab, and now you got a child that's about 9 years old and the mother that rode off on their bicycles. So here were two teenage girls that decided to acquire what belonged to two other people because they wanted to go use their bicycles because they didn't have their own bicycles. Okay? So they didn't know the difference between what's right and what's wrong, did they? So where did they learn to behave that way? Okay? These are the parasites that I talk about. Just like when I was in Honolulu. If you don't have everything locked down, they seem to think that whatever you got is just as much theirs as it is yours. Okay? So they don't want to use any of their energy to acquire what it is that they get. They want you to use your energy to get it, and then they take it from you. That's a parasite. Now, I measured all that over what I call a time frame, which means from the moment I came in here, I realized I'm living in America. So what I'm doing is I'm measuring the amount of light, okay, which is the balance of the equation between a dark hole and a black hole. Okay, so if we breed more parasites, what happens? We're running on the minus side of the equation, which is running in reverse, rather than going faster and moving forward in time to be in a timeless state. So when you have more parasites feeding on your energy, how are you ever going to get it up? See how that works? So they knew we won the timeline. Timeline 0. So the only way that they knew that they could fight back to maintain their demonic timeline, to collapse ours, was what? Producing more dark houses rather than light houses. Okay? Which means breeding more parasites rather than energy producers. Like the sun. Remember the sun up there? Remember the girl up there? See? That's a free energy giver. So the girls on the bicycles are energy takers. And of course, you can run an equation on that, and it's a basic minus and a slash plus. Okay, which side of the equation are you running on? You're running on the dark or the light. See, so that's one of the reasons why a question I put up in my earlier video about light warriors. How do you know that you might turn to the dark? Okay, now I know for me the answer to that question. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. How do I know that? How do I absolutely know that? Because of the amount of fire that I know that I run on for a goddess, for the birth giver side of creation. That's why. Okay? I've experienced having such an enormous amount of fire that I lit up every single square centimeter of my physical body from the tip of my toes. It blew off the top of my head where I thought my skull cap was going to blow into a gazillion pieces. And then all the frames of everything I experienced here went all the way back in time. Then all of a sudden it went forward in time to this moment in time. I realized, hey man, I wrote my own story. Okay? So when you experience these things and you know these things, it means you know your identity. Okay? There has to be a lighthouse. There has to be a last girl standing. There has to be a birth giver of creation that's still standing amongst all the dark if everything collapsed. Otherwise, you don't have a universe left to experience what love is, which is what light is, which is let there be light. Right? That's how you know, when you know that. So I've always said to myself, I'd rather not be unless I can experience what it means to be the birth giver of all light, which is all love, that we give to everything. And it has to be that way. Otherwise, you're living in an illusion. Because anytime there is ever any doubt about what it is that you are and the energy that you run on the side of the equation that you do run, does what? Produces the possibility that it's not true. And when you realize the sophistication and the level of technology that the dark knows how to use, they know how to change your identity. That's what assimilation is. That's what artificial intelligence is. And that was the last topic I wanted to cover, which dealt with, oh, by the way, before I forget, about Kirk Douglas, I mentioned yesterday about being in the consciousness of a movie. So I was reminding myself last night, because there came Kirk Douglas back when he won an award, which is a Lifetime Achievement Award that is given out by a particular organization that sort of recognizes the lifetime achievement of great actors and actresses. Kirk Douglas has always been a giant in my book because he can play so many different kinds of parts that are so real that he's able to draw you and you become a part of that movie, which means he's removing you from the state of awareness that you once were. Now you're experiencing him, that character. That's an artist that's able to do that because they understand how this works. So he mentioned something that was very important. And he said when he accepted the award that he felt that as an actor or an actress that's telling a story, that hopefully the story that we impart has a beneficial effect on humanity. Bang! That's right. Now we're back to storytellers. The stories that represent the energy that we run, that we share with others about what's possible to experience that's higher than what the dark is. And that was the essence of that, of what Kirk Douglas was trying to impart. So, fast forward to Dan Bongino, and he's got a large audience. He was a former Secret Service agent, New York cop, detective. Now he's got a pretty popular show. He ran for Congress, wasn't successful. You see him on Fox News from time to time as what they call a contributor, right? So he mentioned, he had somebody on yesterday that wrote a book about historical data. Remember I mentioned, I think, about how when I realized as a small child, how for how many generations have they been recycling the same sort of energy harvesting system off humanity without humanity realizing it? And I thought, even if 1 being or 10 being or 1,000 or 10,000 could begin to realize how their consciousness was being held captive to a reality in which they believe that's the one they live in because of what's being presented to them, that they thus run that in their memory, that they could learn how that works enough to be able to push more light instead of darkness and bust through the 55 harmonic. That's what I began calculating when I was a child. In order to do that, it requires an historical analysis. So Dan Bongino was talking to a guy that did an historical analysis, much in the same way that I did mine when I was a child. which is how long have they been harvesting electrical power, low frequency energy. In other words, driving your light down. Okay, sucking it, doing what they did, as I mentioned, to souls, draining your quanta, which is your light, in order to harvest energy and hold humanity captive as energy slaves. That's essentially what it is. And they recycle it, and then, of course, they use the DNA for all their Frankenstein experiments. Everything they do is forbidden. Love is the law. So that's not what love is. That's the measurement. Remember, we carry a measuring stick everywhere that we go. Those are scale measurements. So what I measure is I measure the scale of the energy that we're experiencing at any one given time. And that's the advantage of being analog and having an avatar, is you can adapt to the environment. So it's like having a self-tuning device to adapt, to use the vortex in your heart, which is why we always stay in our heart, to adjust the speed based on the environment that we're in so that we can adapt to it, learn from it, and be a lighthouse within it. So in that particular case, he was talking about the existential threat of artificial intelligence. Okay? Or he was talking about machine learning. That was the point. In other words, this is where if you want to look at it through the lens of what I call the rise of the machines in Terminator, okay, you can see it through the machine that I mentioned about the Matrix, okay, the programmer, the guy who's running the program, he's using the machine in order to, all the beings around Neo don't realize that they're in a time matrix, if you will, a time loop, okay, in which they don't realize that their consciousness is being held captive through a computer or a machine. Remember, spirit, we predate the machine. The song's Ghosts in a Machine. Spirit's in a material world, which means spirit that is in mass density. So you're choosing the density through which you want to experience. Well, when you're aware of what it is that you are and you're looking at mass density, which is your physical body, you're not what the body is. You're aware of what you are in spirit. Spirit is in the light, which is what love is. That's what love is in living spirit. That's living DNA, just like living spirit is in water, just like the living spirit in Mother Earth. Okay? So he was trying to impart to a large audience now. This was a change. This is where Bongino is now starting to, and of course I knew this already, it's what we call incremental steps of awareness. We don't want to throw everything out there up against the wall and say, here it all is, and freak too many people out, and the emotional balance between both sides of the minus and the plus could collapse. You don't want to collapse the timeline. We're on timeline 0. But what it means is you have to raise the state of awareness incrementally. As that guy Q said, breadcrumbs. So Dan Bongino has been feeding everybody breadcrumbs. Okay? Because he's got a large audience and he's on mainstream media. So when he starts to talk about machine learning, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Singularity University, NASA, Silicon Valley, the tech giants, okay, then you begin to realize why Parsa versus Google et al., which is a federal district lawsuit that's being heard in San Diego federal court, if you go look at that document and see the technology that's being used to essentially become part of a machine, which is the transhumanism agenda, because if you look at the names that is on that lawsuit, you'll see Google, YouTube, Bill Gates, New York Times, MSNBC, Anderson Cooper on CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, all the CIA stuff, all the NSA stuff, okay? All their supercomputers. Pine Bluff, Utah, where they run everything through their supercomputers at that facility, right? Everything's about control. They don't want to lose control. So these are demons. Demons that use technology, okay? Because they understand that the only way that they can maintain and perpetuate what it is that they are is through us. So they have to capture the amount of light that we run in order to gain more control from one galaxy to the next, 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 because they don't have an off switch. So this is like a virus that's been let loose in the cosmos, because they are universe killers. So Dan Bongino was sort of like throwing some breadcrumbs out here of who Google, the communications that you're using. That's why the one that I'm communicating with you on does not want anyone to know this information, why it is that I'm always getting pop-ups. They log me in, they log me out. In fact, the Rose Suite channel that I communicate to you on, I didn't give myself the name Rose Suite. NSA did. NSA sent me an email about 6 months ago and said, where are you going now? It's none of your business. Okay? I'm not, it's all about control. We got to know what you're doing all the time. Well, if you become what love is in living spirit, you're not living in any fear, and you're not worried about controlling anything because you don't have to, because nobody's doing any harm with each other. That's what it means to be in a higher density state of consciousness. They don't know how to do that. So what I tell them all the time, go look in the mirror and ask me and tell me what it is you're experiencing. Because if you're in a state of fear, then you're going to attract what it is that you can't love and you can't control. Because love isn't about control. They're about control. What they can't love, which is themselves. So if you don't love yourself, if you are not what love is in living spirit, then you get the message. And that's the message. Is your life scripted or unscripted? And I'll leave you with that for the morning. Bang! See if it gels. These are things that I'm aware of that I share with everyone else. Okay? Have a great day. I love you all. That's where we're going, in the right direction. They lost the war. They lost their timeline. We got a better looking glass. Alice lost hers. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things Dan Bongino put up when I went to go look at his Twitter. He had an image of Alice. Remember Alice in Wonderland? Alice in the looking glass, right? And she was shedding tears like bullets, okay, out of her eyes. Do you realize what the message is? So I sent a message to Dan Bongino. I said, I know Alice lost her looking glass, okay? We got a better one. It lasts forever. It's called eternal light, okay? Because we exist simultaneously between past, present, future. What do you want to experience? A past event, a present event, a now time, timeless event, or you want to go into the future? How fast are you going? That's up to you. You got your own accelerator. I use my heart. I go as fast as I want. I know, it's so simple, isn't it? But, it's like getting everybody there. It's up to them. That's what breadcrumbs are. Hey, now I'm awake. They call it the woke community. But they are deceivers. They even have a group that I learned through, what's her name? Kathy O'Brien. This is one of the first big whistleblowers that came out and talked about, and I know this is going to ruffle a lot of feathers, Ronnie Reagan. Ronnie Reagan was not what you thought he is, okay? Now, according to Kathy O'Brien, because I've never met Ronnie Reagan, I've never experienced his energy, but I used to think, man, you're talking everything about the Declaration of Independence, the bigger the government, the worse it is, and I thought, wow, this sounds like a patriot, right? Come to find out, he was hanging out with Gerald Ford, who was another sick pedophile, okay, using drugs. What's the guy who used to be the Attorney General, along with, I think it's Reagan or Ford? I forget Thornburg, Dick Thornburg. Yeah, that guy had delivered to him a kilo of cocaine. So what you begin to realize is that the political system that is represented by America, and of course that's easy to know when you're a child, when you're reading the Declaration of Independence and all these monuments that were put up, and you go, that story sounds good, but that's not what I experienced by what you're telling me, the country I live in, because my experience do not match what you say that you represent what you are. So you begin to realize that the ruling political system are run by demons, liars, kidnappers, murderers, drug addicts,